Hello, friends. I saw some real fireworks on the Arkansas State Senate recently, and I guess I will leave a link to where you can see it yourself, but they make it work on the Senate website. You kind of have to look up the right day and everything to find it. But I'll give you the important parts, and I'll put in clips from it here. But the idea was that, and it was a Republican versus Republican sort of feud here, because the state Senate in Arkansas is almost all Republican anyway. But it's State Senator Bryan King. Bryan King was a state senator. He was a Republican caucus leader. And he's in a fight here with the current Republican caucus leader, Blake Johnson. And the issue is rules changes. Bryan King had some rules changes he'd been talking about for some time. I believe that people would be for at least one of these ideas from across the political spectrum. It almost doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. It was about putting transparency and accountability to the legislature. You know, the legislature, they're going to spend all day for the next 3 months putting accountability on you and demanding you be transparent, and they're going to be holding others accountable. And Bryan King is saying we've got some problems in our process, and let's hold ourselves accountable a little bit with these rules changes. And they didn't like that. And so Blake Johnson, he objected. He said, you need to withdraw all these bills because you didn't come through us. And so that's what the feud's about. I want you to see him make the request, see how he makes the request. We'll talk about it. Then we're going to talk about how Bryan King answers the request. And, you know, the question we should all ask ourselves even goes beyond these issues, and it's, how much power do you want a party structure to have? Do you want a party structure to have so much power that they can block measures for transparency and accountability from ever seeing the light of day, from ever being discussed on the floor of the legislature? And that's really the biggest issue here. The rest of it, how we solve these individual problems that we're going to talk about here, we're going to let Bryan King talk about, that's secondary. The biggest issue to me is, structurally, are they using the party caucus system to sweep stuff under the rug and to keep from having to make any changes that would allow them to be better servants, public servants? So let's start with, notice the feeling tone, notice what the Blake Johnson is saying, and let's get this feud underway. Let's take a look at this.
Request that all 4 of Senator King's bill be pulled down by the sponsor until they can be heard in the Republican caucus.
I have a question. I mean, I've had these out here. First, I don't know.
The substance of the last 2 rule changes were brought before the caucus. Senator Hester's was not brought before the caucus, and your rule changes hadn't been brought before the caucus.
Why didn't you say something? I talked about this orientation a month ago and say, hey, whatever was bringing to the caucus, which I'm gladly done.
Senator, I'm not going to argue. If you want to present them, go ahead. I'm going to request the caucus not vote for them.
I have a question.
Now, I want you to consider very carefully what Blake Johnson has said and done here. And it tells you so much about many things. One of them is the corrupting influence, especially in the wrong hands of someone who's not aware of power in institutions. You know, Blake Johnson is the chairman of the Republican caucus. The state Senate in Arkansas is almost all Republican anyway, so it doesn't much matter. But what he's complaining about is, he says, I want you to pull these bills because it didn't come through me first. It needs to come through the Republican caucus. And we're going to see Bryan King answer and say, basically, you guys knew about this. I've been talking about it for over a month. You knew it was coming. I did talk to you. You never told me I had to. But anyway, but maybe that's just the excuse, but what he's saying here is, it doesn't matter whether these ideas are good ideas or bad ideas. What matters is you didn't come through me. You didn't give my power structure a chance to veto or approve this bill. Now, let me ask you folks, when the founding fathers set up our government with balancing executive branches and legislative branches and judicial branches, were they accounting for political parties being able to do stuff like that? Where it didn't matter what your constituents wanted, if the party structure had to approve it first. I mean, if Senator King's constituents wanted him to run these rule changes, and he talked about it, and honestly, I bet you every one of their districts, even in the Democrats, the people would probably approve of at least one of these rule changes that Senator King was proposing. None of that mattered. Once you have people whose interest, once they get power, they use their power to get themselves more power. And that's what Blake Johnson was doing here. And what was good government? Not even a consideration. What the people back home wanted? Not even a consideration. What's the only consideration? You didn't go through me. It's got to come through the group, the club here that we're in. And so, I'm going to let you listen to Senator King's answer. He has good answers to some of that, but Senator King didn't back down. And what Blake Johnson was saying is, well, this guy, the substance of it was brought before our club, and this other guy, the substance wasn't brought before that club, and I asked him to take his down, and he did. Now, my personal guess, if I want to be a little conspiratorial minded here, and if you're not, when it comes to politics, if you don't think there's conspiracies, you're probably too gullible to even engage in it, and you probably even not ought to vote. You don't have enough understanding of how the world works. These guys conspire constantly for money and power. That's a part of human nature. That's why there's laws in every state against conspiracy to do X or Y. So I would not doubt, I don't have proof, but I would not doubt, because Senator Hester is very well connected. And Senator Hester introduced these rules changes, and he pulls them on Blake Johnson's request. They knew Senator King was going to do this. They knew he was going to introduce some reform measures. They didn't want the reform measures. They didn't want to be held accountable. I mean, these guys, all day long, every day, over the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, they're going to be putting accountability on you. They're going to be putting accountability on other people. They're going to be holding other people accountable, doggone it, to all these laws they generate. And Bryan King is saying, why don't we hold ourselves accountable a little here? And they're bucking him. They don't like it. They think they should be free and unbound, and the people they don't like should be unfree and bound by all these rules they're about to generate. So, yeah, I think Senator Hester, and I can't prove it, but I think Senator Hester and Senator Johnson had this little arranged deal where we want to make this King guy look bad. So, Bart Hester, you introduce a couple of rule changes that you didn't run through the caucus, and I will go and ask you to pull them because you didn't, and you will do that. And then you're, the Senate Majority Leader, and you will set an example, and then Bryan King will seem more out of line because he didn't jump through our caucus hoops first. Because Bart Hester is connected. He could have gotten those rules heard and favorably looked at if he'd wanted to. I just don't believe that he had no idea if that's what Blake Johnson wanted done. I think it was more of a setup to try to make Bryan King look bad, and I'm not falling for it. You shouldn't either. But let's hear what Bryan King has to say to Johnson's request.
But, there's two things in a campaign, and one thing that I think's down here is a fair word and a fair fight. I mean, I think that's what people expect in government and what we should do. And I have no problem or issue with the problem of discussing the caucus. If anybody knows me, if I want to do something, I'm more than happy and amenable to tell you exactly what everything's going to do. I would have just, appreciated the respect to say, hey, why don't you come to the caucus beforehand and do that? And I would have gladly done that. But, didn't do that. So I think today, I would appreciate this body to just go ahead and vote for the rules because I had went through the process. I have been transparent. I have been available. I started this process all the way back at Petit Jean Mountain, okay? And you come in the last minute and want to do this. When I prepared and everything, talked to members, been amenable to that, open discussions with anybody and everybody to do that. Like I said, I understand. I've been a caucus leader. It's a very difficult job to do that. But this is the thing. We've had the plans, had the structure, everything like that. I think today's the day we do business on that. And I would have been extremely amenable to the caucus to have talked about these rules beforehand had I been given proper notice. I wasn't, so I feel like today we need to vote on these issues today.
So Senator King answers by saying, you know, I was talking about this in November. We had this big meeting in Pettigene, all the Republicans that got elected in the November election. We met right afterwards and we had a talk. And I had said, here are the rule changes I want. I'd floated this stuff with all you guys. I'd made myself available to you guys. None of y'all really said anything. One guy texted me right before we got here, and I answered his text. You never told me that you even wanted me to run it by the caucus. And in other words, he's basically accusing him of retroactively making a requirement that he hadn't had before because he doesn't want to do these rules. Not saying that in plain words, but just sending that message. You know, you never told me I had to do that, and I've already been talking to you guys about this, and now y'all are acting surprised, like, oh, these rules are out of the blue and you just don't understand. You understand. I even talked about it in my election campaign. My people, the people back home, I ran on this. They wanted me to do it. I talked to you, and now I'm here. Let's vote on it. And that's what he said. So Senator King is sticking to his guns here, and he's saying, I want you to vote on these things anyway. And Blake Johnson's already said, I'm going to advise all the members of the caucus to vote against it, and he walked off. He didn't want to, you know, to me, the Senate chamber is a place for you have the dialogue, you have the talk, you reason together with each other to see what the best law should be. That's my conception. I think that was the founder's conception of what the halls of the legislature and the Senate should be like. Blake Johnson's just like, you know, you didn't come through me and get permission first. You're floating idea on this floor that I didn't approve of, so I'm telling everybody to vote against it. I'm walking off, and you're in the middle of your sentence trying to answer me, and I'm just going to walk off, which is what he did. So let's take a look at the proposals. The first of the three proposals that Senator King wants to float to reform this thing, and it has to do with the number of bills, either the number of bills that the legislator can sponsor or the amount of votes it takes to get a bill out of committee. So let's take a look at one of those.
It would eliminate a lot of, possible things that in appearance does not look well. Of walk in there and there's two members, we had a quorum, and then we don't have a quorum, and it would just say, hey, we have to have 5 people say. That doesn't mean that you still can't sign a bill out. It doesn't mean any of that. It just needs to be, there needs to be 5 recorded votes. It would eliminate the other thing too, if people do, like they pass out, there's no one there, it's late at night or whatever, and I'm using those examples, and then there's only 3 people in there they voted out to just do a favor, get it on the floor, and then they vote against it and they help, and it just has a more straightforward process to it.
All right. So what Senator King is saying here, that all these standing committees, there's 8 people on the committee. A lot of times they don't show up to the committee meetings. A quorum is 5 persons. At least 5 of the 8 on the committee have to show up and even be there. Now, the way it is now, let's say there's 8 people on the committee, 3 don't show up, only 5 are there. If the majority of those 5, which is just 3, vote do pass, then the bill gets a do pass out of committee and moves on to the next step, which, really sort of greases the skids. If a legislator is telling the folks back home, I'm against this, I'm there, I will fight it for you, but he's really for it, he has a couple of things he can do. One of those things is, if there's 3 members that are for it, he and his other 2 buddies can just walk out and be gone from the committee at the right time, and the chairman winks at him and they pull out this controversial bill, and the 2 people, let's say it's a conservative bill, and or let's say it's a leftist bill, or it's a maybe it's just a big government bill that people don't like left or right, but some giant corporation does want. So, they wink at the chairman, and him and his two buddies get out, and then there's only 3 people left in the room, and maybe they're in safe seats. They vote for it, and it doesn't matter anyway because their votes aren't recorded. See, that it's just a voice vote, and he tells his constituents, hey, it slipped through at a time I wasn't there, or look, we got outvoted on that one. Because that's the other thing he could do, though. He could say, in committee, he could vote to get it out on the floor with a due pass recommendation, and then when it's out there already, and once they get a due pass recommendation from the right committees, they almost always pass. So then he goes out on the floor and votes against it. And he goes and tells people back home, yeah, I voted against that, but you were the key vote that voted it out of committee, and there's no record of that. And so what Senator King is saying, there should be the majority of every committee, whether they are there present to cast their vote or they write down, yes, I support the bill, and hand it to the chairman of the committee to be counted as a yes vote. 5 votes out of the 8 should be required for a due pass recommendation. And that's what Senator King is saying. And they hate it. They hate it. They hate that accountability. They want to be able to continue to play these games with their constituents where they're telling them they're against the bill, but then they're really doing what they can to get it passed, or it's an unpopular piece of legislation and the people are watching their committee, so that they want to be able to get it out with less votes. They want to be able to slide things through that most people are not for. And Bryan King is saying, what if government just sort of limit ourselves to doing things that a lot of people are for? Wouldn't that be great? So they didn't want the accountability. They didn't want the scrutiny. They didn't want their votes recorded. And so eventually I think they asked a bunch of questions. Did they play dumb? I don't know if they were playing dumb or if they were dumb, but it doesn't matter. They should have known. He's been talking about the thing for 2 months. He's told them what they're going to do, and some of these guys are acting like they never heard it before. Now, maybe in 1 or 2 cases, if they didn't go to Petit Jean, they hadn't heard it before. If they were a Democrat, they hadn't heard it before. But this was not this was not a bill that Republicans who claim to be the government party of restraint and small government should oppose. I can see why the Democrats would oppose it, and I think the Democrats would have opposed it because they want it to be easier to put more laws on you. But it turns out now the Republicans want that too. So that one, I think he eventually withdrew it because it was such a muck up. But now let's go to this next one. The next one was limiting the number of bills that people could sponsor to 1 a day. So let's say you had a 60-day session. Each senator could sponsor 60 bills. If it is extended to a 90-day session, which they usually are, then it would be 90 bills. 35 guys could change 90 new laws each in a 90-day session. That is a lot. That is a lot of new laws for us to keep up with as they churn through and put in benefits for various special interests. And Senator King was like, he wanted to limit that for many reasons, good reasons. Let's listen to some of those reasons.
Can I explain the amendment first?
I apologize.
That's okay. So explaining that amendment basically is, this is my 7th session, and every 6 before that has been where the first month, like today, and it's a little different today because of piling, is that it's like 70 degrees and no weather. And then by the end of the session, it's like a Cat 5. You got bills running here, you got running here, and it just seems like it's been every session that the last 30 days, and especially the last 20 days, people realize the door's closing and they start running bills. So to address that, and I always say there's a bubble world down here and there's a real world back home. And if you saw in Washington, D.C., people get tired of passing bills, not knowing what's in it. You have to vote for it before you find out what's in it. This would slow down the process. And the goal, as I was having with Senator Wallace earlier back there, is to try and even the flow. Where we don't spend the first month of the session down here gaveling in at 1 o'clock and leaving at 1:20. And at the end of the session, we've got a full calendar bill. Now, this does not apply to budget bills. So this just applies to our bills, that you come in here and the max bills you can have is 35. Now, we know that several of you not running bills, you don't do that. People went into things like, well, why don't we just limit the number of bills filed? And this is something actually I started talking about before I left 4 years ago, and that creates problems too. But this would just allow one bill per senator today. What that is addressing is, once again, that we don't get here at the end of the session, that we're sitting here at 7:45. We didn't get done that day. We've got a deadline coming up, and we're just sitting here batching bills and voting them out. That's not the way I do business, the corporations I work for, or our personal business. Rubber stamping is a bad way to do government. Now,
So what Senator King was trying to do here was have some better government. Let's put some limitations on ourselves, because what's happening isn't producing good government. We're kind of waiting till the end. At this first, we have a slow flow of bills. People read them, people deliberate them. By the end, people are just cramming all these bills through, and we're voting on them. We don't even know what's in them. Our constituents don't like that. Nobody likes that. The left doesn't like it. The right doesn't like it. Moderates don't like it. It's bad government. And he said, look, I'm going to try to fix it. That's what I want to do here. Let's limit ourselves in the Senate to sponsoring one bill a day per senator. So 35 bills every day. And honestly, we do not suffer, my friends, from having too few laws. Really, we suffer from having too many, and from the churn of the laws, how they keep changing so that we can't even keep up with them. And they like that. That's their stock in trade. A special interest comes with some dollars and say, we want the law changed. Well, they're the guys to go to. So they get a big campaign contribution, and they'll sponsor a bill and change that law. And 2 years later, another special interest will approach some other senator and ask them to change it some other way. And they're making hay off this process. And so, is it good government? No, it's terrible government. People don't know what's in these bills. And even, one Hester, I believe in there, he kind of hinted that he would hold back and wait and put in bills late because they get less scrutiny, because they move faster. And if he didn't say that in the original video, doesn't matter, because that's done. That's a tactic. That's something they do to take advantage of the system and the way there's this crush at the end. And so Bryan King's saying, look, everybody's complaining about it. Our constituents don't like it. Let's do something about it. And they were all like, well, we just don't, we're going to be so cautious. Are we sure this is the right way to go? What if it has this consequence? What if it has that consequence? And Senator King was like, well, folks, for the vast majority of you, the 29 that were Republicans, I've been talking about this for 2 months. I was going to do this. Now you're acting all surprised today that I kept my word and here is the rule to do it. You don't like the way I'm doing it? What is your way to do it? You don't have one, because you don't want to limit yourself. You just want to spend all day in here limiting other people and putting laws on them, but you yourself do not want to accept any accountability and transparency. And that's what this is about. This is about accountability and transparency. If you think about it, so was the previous rule, because people would know how the legislators voted in these committee meetings, because there would be 5 recorded votes every time to get a bill out of committee. They don't like that. That's transparency and accountability. Same thing here. Now they can't say, hey, it came through in a rush, it got by me, I didn't read it. How can we read it? There's just so many coming through. We're so helpless here. And Bryan King like, no, we're not helpless. Let's make the rule. But they won't do it. They don't want the transparency. They don't want the accountability. They want to be able to not only get the bills, the special interests with the big money, want them to pass, working for corporations more than regular constituents. They want to be able to tell, like the activist that doesn't have a lot of money that comes in and, hey, would you sponsor a bill for us? We think this should be done. That, sure, I'll do that. And they sponsor the bill. Then they don't really even try to get it passed. They just present the image that they're trying to look out for you, but they don't. So they file a bunch of bills that they don't even necessarily really want to run that bad. So that's just the level of duplicity that's out there, and they want to keep a system that will allow them to do that. And, you know, instead of being honest with the constituents and saying, look, I don't think this is one of my priorities this session, maybe next time, come to me earlier, let's work it out a little bit. They just play them along. So they didn't want that either. You know, and it's maybe they had some reasonable objections to some of the things or some of the unintended consequences of King's bill. I didn't think it was anything that couldn't be worked around. But the bottom line was they weren't in the least interested coming up with an alternative. And at least the 26 or 29 Republicans, they knew this was coming. This wasn't a secret. They just pretended like, oh gosh, I haven't even thought about this before. Why not? It's something your constituents want. It's something Bryan King said, yes, I want to address it 2 months ago. And they're acting like it, oh, surprise. What could be the bad consequences of this? So this next one's even worse. This one is that basically all regular people across the spectrum would want this to be done. They just don't want it done. Same thing, transparency and accountability. It's for you, but not for them. Let's listen. Let's listen to Senator King explain why he wants his last proposal passed, and that is, if you are a legislator, if you are a senator and you owe back taxes, your per diem is garnished so that you can't get per diem, paid for per diem until you pay your taxes.
Figure out, I mean, if you owe back taxes, then you ought to, not be able to collect per diem checks, taxpayers, and then come up here and do business. It just sets a standard out there with people. Our schools and everything operates on most of us paying. We've all had our backs against the wall. I've had my backs against the wall. You have mistakes, things come up. That's not what this is about, folks. It's about abuse of a system that we expect, that we have to start this body. We have to expect the people to pay their taxes on time. For us to collect a check, they need to be committed. If everybody waited and everybody got committed, and like I said, I've had my back against the wall and all that. It's not about beating down on somebody. But if you're going to come down here and do business with people, and you're going to cash a check this week from the taxpayers, you know what, that they have already paid their taxes, well, then I think you should make sure you paid yours.
Sure. And my question.
These are the same people, they're going to the session, they pass laws that they don't even know what's in it. They are reckless about it sometimes. They don't think through the unintended consequences of their bill. They just had 6 sections of the Arkansas Code on election law thrown out by federal courts because they were unconstitutional. And in every case, they had been told this before. They had been told, hey, the law you're about to pass, it isn't constitutional. And they blew all that off, passed the election laws anyway, got taken to court, lost in court, didn't matter. It's the same thing that they got taken to court for and thrown out in prior decades, and they just did the same thing again. They were reckless about it. But on this rule change, they're so cautious. We're not sure that's legal. We're not sure we can do that. And Bryan King's like, yeah, I checked with the DFA. Yeah, we can do that. They can go. And oh gosh, I just don't know. Guys, what's your solution? Do you want zero transparency and accountability on you while you're here all day putting more accountability on the people? Do you really want members among us to not pay their taxes while we are putting tax laws on other people, while our very paychecks are from other people who did pay their taxes on time? And guys, I think I heard when they did a voice vote, there may have been 1 or 2 other people that said yay out of the 35 in that room, but no, they didn't even want that. I'm not saying they're pathetic. I'm saying that display was pathetic. It was pathetic, okay? It was unworthy, really, of a body that should be held in high esteem, like the state Senate. Now, so let me finish talking about, that's kind of what I wanted to say about those 3 things. And let me go and sum up and sort of zoom out and do the bigger picture before I close. I mean, these guys really do seem to think right and wrong is determined by what is good for their brand and not the state. You know, like that whole thing with having to bring it before the caucus and say, how dare you just bring this to the state Senate without first bringing it through the caucus and letting our club approve it, which of course they would just kill it, and they would kill it without anybody ever knowing because it could be done in secret. So again, it's against transparency and accountability. But the bottom line is, Blake Johnson really seemed to think he had the moral high ground there. He was acting like he was right because his sense of morality has been twisted into thinking whatever is good for his club must be good for the state. And it's not true. And that the party system is sort of being used as an end run around what the founders intended the legislature to be, a place where these ideas can be brought to light, where the dialogue can take place. And they're trying to use the party system to squelch all that and to hide all that and to get out of transparency and accountability. Let's not bring in any ideas that, okay, let's put it this way. If ideas cannot get to the Senate floor unless they're approved by the caucus first, then what if you as a constituent in your city, in your region, want something that the caucus and the state party don't want? Can it ever be heard? No. Can your representative ever, even in theory, represent you? No. They can't. They can't do it. The party system, the only interests that get heard are the ones who have the favor of the party, either through writing checks or some other way, some other connection. It undermines what the legislature is supposed to be the people's branch. And the way the party system is being used right now, it undermines all that. Every one of those things, and some of you, I know you have a favorite party, and you like your party, and that's fine. But guys, I really think we'd be better off if there were 10 parties. And if one wasn't doing well, it wouldn't be so dramatic and traumatic and people getting upset. And it would be more like changing brands of laundry detergent. The one you're using now, you don't like it, so you switch to another one, and you're not emotionally traumatized by it. But when you've got two parties and you're trained to hate the other one, then you're a psychological hostage. No matter how badly the guys in your party react, you kind of want to stick with them because the other side is Satan. And it's perfect if you don't want transparency and accountability, and these guys don't want it. They don't want it. And they've got to. So, when I said earlier that I don't want to just blame the legislators here because it's supposed to be self-government. It means you govern yourselves. And if we are not doing the work, if we are being too trusting of our club, of our whichever team red or team blue, whichever one we have, if we're just too trusting and sort of find ways to justify everything they do and demonize everything the other club does, then is it really the fault of these 35 people that we're poorly governed, or is it our fault? Maybe we have some accountability here too. So instead of me just railing against the legislators, I don't want to do that. I think they did very poorly here. I think they need to think about it, and most of them should honestly be embarrassed by this performance. Maybe they will be and get better. That's going to be my prayer, that they look at this, they even look what I've done here, not to hate on them, but that they get better. Because I'm not saying the mess we're in is all their fault. The people have some responsibility too. With this caveat, earlier I had mentioned election laws. I really think the people of Arkansas need to come to some grips with things too. Again, it's not all their fault. That if they are not getting good representation from the two parties that are established in the state, and they're not, they should start another one, or run as independents, or go around a party system. It's not just ruining, doing what you see here in Arkansas, it's ruining the country. The country's in real trouble. And these two parties have taken turns running things while this is happening. So what if you say, I want to run as an independent, I want a new party? Well, the legislature has really made that hard. they've passed rules restricting competition because, again, while they want themselves no transparency, no accountability, no rules on them, they want to put a lot of rules on other people, especially people that want to compete with them. And so they've constantly kept tweaking and changing the law, making ballot access harder to get on the ballot as an independent or a new party. And recently, the federal courts have had enough, and they've thrown out 6 sections of Arkansas election law. Bryan King wants to do some things to fix that. And I would like them to listen to him a lot better than they did on these rules that he wanted to pass. They need to do something. The courts have said, your laws are no good. They need to replace them with better laws. I wish they would listen to him on this. I think he has some good ideas on it. They need to do something. Just pretending like whatever's good for their club is good for the state, it's wrong and it's not working. Now, so that's my caveat. Instead of blaming them for everything, we the people should do something. But if they are having corrupt election laws that don't let us go around them, then it is their fault. Then they do deserve, harsher condemnation. Now, if they put in just election laws and the people still just keep doing what they're doing, then that's not on them. That's not they're misbehaving, but you know what? That's your job, citizen, to fix it. And if you won't, because you're too lazy, you really like it, whatever excuse, it doesn't matter. It's really, we're just getting the government we deserve in that case. But they haven't done that yet. They haven't made the election laws just. But if they do that, really, the responsibility shifts back to us. So the question would be, what are you going to do? And I think it probably starts with you contacting your legislator and saying, we need to make the election laws looser to be able to get on the ballot to go around you guys. You say, the Democrats say they're pro-choice and they don't mean it. And the Republicans say they believe in free market competition and don't mean it. And on the election laws, you need to mean it and allow us to get to the ballot even if we don't go through your club. The way they got it now, you can't even do a rules change. They want you to go through their club for a rules change, much less a law. So that's my rant on that. I hope that you prayerfully consider what I'm saying. Thank you so much for listening. May God bless you.